Hello everyone, and welcome to the Singapore International Festival of Arts, and to this panel discussion, The Age of Anxiety, Music Making for the Moment. This program is presented as part of the Festival House, the epicenter of the festival, which this year features talks, workshops, performances, and installations that explore the idea of care, compassion, and community, sparked by our collective isolation during the pandemic. My name is Shridar, one of the programmers for the Compassion Chamber Music series, which features 8 concerts that explore the idea of compassion and the communality of music making in times of crisis. This afternoon, I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 artists who will be performing as part of the series: pianist Jonathan Shin, keyboardist Gerald Lim, and ensemble manager for Red Dot Baroque, Derek Koh, co-founder of Moss Percussion, and pianist Churen. Welcome and thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
So this Compassion Chamber Music series was programmed as a way of responding to the moment. And the works that we've worked with you on for the various programs explore different aspects of the idea of compassion. People often associate classical music as being something that is quite removed from engaging with sort of contemporary issues and ideas. And how do you think a program like this can change some of those perceptions?
Well, I think some of the themes that we're approaching are very... Well, they're classic themes, and it doesn't really matter what time they're in. And they could be in the past, in the contemporary, these things are themes that we'll keep talking about. And in that way, you know, things from the past, they recur again in the present, they will happen in the future, especially the themes that we're addressing. And so, yeah, in that way, it becomes quite relevant to us. We're never really far away from, you know, the things that we talk about in art. Yeah.
I think for me, contemporary music is really important because it's the music of today. You know, and for me, I'm a percussionist, so I'm actually playing music from mostly living composers compared to my fellow colleagues and peers here that are playing music from hundreds of years ago. So I think I don't have so much pressure to think about what I have to program, you know, from which era. But for us, when we program a piece of music, or for me, when I program a piece of music, I always try to think that the audience want to hear something afresh, that is something out of the box. And for me, I think it is easier in a way because I play percussion and I have all the different instruments and colors that I can choose from. So it's good for me. Yeah, and I think the audience needs to accept the fact that classical music it might be boring to some, but I think it is an art that people should learn how to appreciate and want to appreciate. Yeah.
Churen, what about yourself?
I think classical music is only boring when we see these works as works or artifacts. If we begin to think about them more broadly, as experiences or as reflections, as very, very personal stories, I think this is not by any means making it superficial. It's not a superficial understanding of classical music as experience, but other elements, other parameters of performance become clearer. For example, the interaction of bodies, the interaction of a body with an instrument, or the interaction between different bodies of musicians in chamber music, which is what I think all of us are presenting as part of SIFA. These are very beautiful and very poetic moments that go beyond the meaning of a work of music. And that's what I would love for an audience member to go away with, the appreciation of music as an experience.
Actually, I really like what you mentioned about stories, because that is at the heart of what being a human is. We create we create fictions, spaces of color and creativity, and we share them with each other. And in that way, when you put that music as a way of storytelling, then it becomes, we've been doing it for millennia, you know. And I think that's one of the incredible things about what we're doing here and sharing as bodies. Yeah.
Actually, I had the idea of the relationship between the body and an instrument was actually quite an interesting point that you brought up. And I think that it's kind of interesting that in the range of programs that all of you guys are presenting, there's a different kind of angle or different ways of looking at that particular relationship. In the case of percussion, for example, you are a body dealing with very large instruments sometimes and very sort of complex movements of like running back and forth between instruments, and there's a certain kind of complexity to percussion playing. In the case of Shin, your program features singers, so actually the instruments that you are also dealing with are actually other bodies in a space. So, and in the case of, for Radio Baroque, like you guys are actually playing on instruments that are not contemporary in the sense they're actually sort of old instruments. So how do you feel like sort of all these various ways of expressing stories through your body by playing or by singing sort of can also be things that we relate to in now, in this sort of in this time that we live in?
Yeah, so okay, to the idea of storytelling, I think one of the reasons why classical music is scary because we internalize the idea that there is a definite story that we ought to be able to gain from a piece of music. This might be something to do with the background, the biography of a composer, or its place in music history, or even, theoretical elements that perhaps the average listener doesn't quite get. And that becomes something quite scary to them because they don't know the story. But in fact, there are so many other stories. The story of people playing music together and how they communicate and speak to each other, that's an inspiring story, and that's what I love listening or looking out for when I listen to a concert. Who cares about what the story behind the piece was? It's any story that you find interesting of a music performance, right? With bodies and instruments, I can think of two ways that bodies and instruments communicate on stage. Firstly, our body is our instrument, even as instrumentalists. The way we gesture, every movement of the arm conveys a certain affect. For example, dynamics in music. It's not a question of loud and soft. It's a question of intensity. And this intensity is expressed through every quality of movement. The sort of tension in your muscle, this expresses a dynamic growth. And then also, as pianists, the instrument is an extension of my cognition. It's a way that I conceptualize. Okay, the instrument is an extension of my cognition in that in the moment of performance, my body is responding intuitively to the touch, to the possibilities of the keyboard before me. And it's a source of inspiration to find new spontaneity in playing these music that we've played many times before.
Right, and especially in a time, like of all times, like now, when the frailty and how easily, as we're seeing now at such a critical moment in history, how bodies can be broken down by things that are just, beyond our comprehension. And I think music, in that sense of using our bodies, the physicalness, the whole somaticness of like using our every sinew, it's almost a direct statement against what's going on, and I think it's in that way a very brave gesture. If it, no matter how fruitless, it's a brave gesture to make art for humanity in a time like this. Yeah.
Gerald, actually, I have a question for you because you play you play a number of instruments, but in Baroque music, especially, improvisation is kind of an important element of that. How do you feel? How do you sort of respond to the idea of improvisation, sort of as a contemporary musician playing this sort of very old music now? Because your music, the music in your concert is actually the oldest in the entire series.
Okay, I think there are many similarities between Baroque music and contemporary music. And I always think of myself as a jazz musician, in contemporary times. We improvise. We sometimes riff off each other. Like, for example, I have to be very attentive to my instrumentalist or my singer who might be doing a certain ornament. After that, I'll just put it in my improvisation, even though I'm mostly playing chords, as a continual player. So that's something that is quite relevant. I mean, we always have to be on our toes, actually, all the time, listening to our fellow musicians. Yeah.
Sort of staying on that question. So your program features mostly the music entirely the music of Bach, and it is sort of music that at this point is almost 300 years old, correct? Yes, 300 years old. And Bach, in a lot of cases, actually, a lot of the music he wrote was for very specific occasions, for church ceremonies, for mass and things like that. But we are performing it sort of in a very different kind of context. So maybe if you could share a little bit about bringing Bach to sort of like the 21st century and how there's a certain kind of universality in his music that we still kind of connect with very deeply today, because he's still sort of like featured very prominently in popular culture even now.
Okay, I think Bach's legacy never went away over the years, be it in the 19th century, be it in the 20th century, or right now in the 21st century. We are still playing Bach, listening to Bach. I think it's for a reason. Now, the idea of universality is kind of a paradox when it comes to Bach, because the idea of universal is like, you're thinking of having a central idea, or there's a common thread that binds all of us. But in fact, I think what Bach strove to achieve is basically he's trying to write things for different occasions, for different people to appreciate. So right now I can't think of any other composers that is being appreciated by so many different types of instrumentalists. For example, like for us keyboardists, we play his keyboard works all the time, from the clavier ubong. And then for the cellos, they have the cello suites. For the violinists, they have the violin sonatas, obbligato sonatas, and the solo partitas, and flutes also, they have sonatas. So I think he's trying. I think what he's trying to do here is he's trying to really write music for everyone to appreciate. And in some ways, his music makes other people. Sorry, I need to rethink this. His music makes other people of other instrumentalists want to play it. So for example, keyboardist wants to play the violin chaconne, for example. And right, yes. I mean, so many people have written keyboard transcriptions on the chaconne. There's the famous Busoni, and there's Brahms. So even some contemporary harpsichordists also try to write it for the harpsichord also. I haven't done mine though, maybe one day. But I think the idea of Bach is also because he is he's very human in a sense. People always think of him as a god, but his music is very human in the sense that it portrays the frailty of the human body, as we talked about just now by John, but also how to let go and give yourself up, when your time is up, because in Bach's time, many people, Bach basically lost more than half of his children before they turned adult, so that was really the norm in the past, so people basically fear dying, and what Bach is trying to write in his music, especially in his cantatas, is to, tell people that, there's always a superior force out there, and even if you're not like, a religious person, I think definitely that all of us will believe in some kind of spiritualism, So there's always sort of like a higher forces, be it a god, or it's just some invisible being, or it's just or like even nature, for example. Just give yourself up, and submit to it, and just don't try to fight against it, because at the end of the day, we are just here as temporal beings. That's all. Yes, and I think it's all the same whether you are living in the past or the present. It's always like that. So I think that's the common thread that what Bach is trying to achieve in his writing also.
There's two things actually I want to connect to your program, because the first is sort of the ghost of Bach does kind of shadow the program that you are doing in the Ravel pieces, especially. And I'll get to that in a sec. And the other thing also is that the idea of loss. I mean, Bach was someone who was very familiar with loss because he lost family members, and at that time it was actually very common for people to die at quite a younger age because there was less access to medicine and things like that. But your program actually kind of looks at loss on a much grander scale because in addition to the Ravel pieces, the works of Poulenc and Britten both respond to two different world wars, which were sort of two of the most profound events of the 20th century. So maybe you can share a little bit more on the sort of the Ravel and the kind of the ghost of Bach that kind of dominates that, but also a little bit more on the songs that are part of this program.
Yeah, my program is terribly morose. I'm looking and I'm like, wow, there's like, you can smell death. Like, I mean, of course, Ravel was responding when he wrote Les Tombeaux de Couperin. It's dedicated each movement to the friends that he lost in the war. And like he's always been a very he's always looked at forms from the past. So in the program you can see I'm playing the Falan, I'm playing the minuet, I'm playing the fugue, and these are very traditional forms. But like you said, all three composers are actually looking to the past and crystallizing their contemporariness into these, like coalescing them into these like beautiful, perfect forms. And I think Ravel does. Obviously, Ravel for me is like the perfect miniaturist. Not thinking about Daphne and Chloe, of course. That's a different structure. But for the Poulenc and the Britten, they both faced, at least Poulenc, faced great trials, and Britten, of course, himself too. But there's this shared experience, I guess, between three of them of loss, and using their art to sort of, I guess in a Kierkegaardian way, sort of push through that sort of that pain, and here we are. Like if I was sitting here, at least I get to play. I'm so happy that I get to play this music and bring it to life. And like I said earlier, it doesn't go away. We will be talking about death. We will be losing people we love. We will be remembering them in different ways. I will be remembering people I lose in my own way, in my own compositions. And I'll be looking to Ravel. I'll be thinking like, wow, that's one way to do it. Or looking at Poulenc's work. And you wouldn't, the funny thing for me is that you wouldn't hear, I don't think you would hear loss so much as you hear the different ways that they treat loss. For Poulenc, there's a certain layer of irony in the music. It's just delectable. It's ravishingly beautiful, the harmonies. And then you look closely and like, oh, it's about blood. It's about death. It's about smashed bodies, and then you get this. I need to look at this closer. At least that's my personal experience of working with the music, And with Britten, he's setting Thomas Hardy's works, and we know he's more of a novelist. Well, not exactly, sorry, but we know him more for his novels. But I don't know where I've lost my train of thought. But I'm basically, to sum it up. Yeah, these composers that are writing about experiences that we will have, about the people they've lost. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Actually, one of my favorite songs on the program is Fête Galante because it's like a 50-second, like crazy. It sounds like a kind of a nonsensical cabaret song, and then you look at the text, and it's really about like he says, he sees these things, including dead bodies flowing down the river, and things like that. So there's always a kind of a layer of this kind of undercutting edge in Poulenc where everything kind of sounds jovial and kind of light, and then he will like undercut it by setting that to this very sort of dark text.
Right, and the Fête Galante itself is an art form which is like portraying capriciousness and all that, and then to have this in like, so there are many layers, like we talk, like there's so many intersections of like ironies of different art forms, and I think it's glorious. I think coalesces into one 50-second piece, done. You're like, oh.
And Churen, you are also playing Poulenc in your program, and your program actually spans quite a wide time span because you have everything from Chopin to works of the 20th century. So if you could talk a little bit more about how sort of the idea of compassion sort of shaped how you put this program together.
I wasn't really thinking about the composers or what they stood for, even the stories behind their works or the inspirations. I was more reflecting about my own experience coming out of COVID as a musician who spent a lot of time, more time ever alone, as well, all of us did. So the circuit breaker was a wonderful time for me to practice a lot. And coming out of circuit breaker, I also found myself playing still alone, because with all of the SMM measures, I think there was a bit of a move towards programming solo piano works. Yeah, so the experience of being alone and making music alone was the genesis of putting together this program, where we moved from playing solos to playing duos, and then finally culminating as a trio. So for the trio, we picked Panufnik, Polish composer Panufnik. His story isn't a completely tragic one. I hear that he's actually a very kind and jovial and warm-hearted person. But the story behind this piece is so it was destroyed in the Second World War, and he had to reconstruct it from his memory. And you know, as musicians playing it now, we don't really know what was new and what was old. But man, that's some pretty good writing for a 19-year-old, you know. And while drawing on the Polish idea, I'm going to play some Chopin. Chopin is, of course, was always longing for his homeland. And this idea of loss of identity, I think, is just a very poignant one when you approach Chopin's music. Poulenc, as well, as you mentioned, the sense of loss, but also the transfiguration of loss into beauty, but always with an edge, so that it doesn't slip into the sentimental or the saccharine. I love that about Poulenc.
Okay, now Derek, actually, so all the other three panelists actually all play instruments that you can play solo, but you as a percussionist, most percussion work tends to be for at least two people, usually, right? I mean, I know there are some solo percussion works, but mostly it tends to be an instrument that you need to come together and you make music together. So maybe you can share sort of what that experience was like last year, sort of during this period, and also how that sort of influenced how you put this program together.
Yeah, as you said, you are not wrong. Like for percussionists, I used to be more of I am still now, like more of an orchestral or collaborative percussionist, where I play with ensembles and orchestras. So when COVID happened, I was like, I couldn't do anything, and I could only like practice on my pad at home, just like they were practicing piano. So for me, I downsized, obviously, and I thought of creating this percussion group with my good friend Joachim. So we initially wanted a duo, actually, so we could have played duo music, because there are lots of duo music written by fabulous composers like John Cage, Philip Glass, and our favorite Steve Reich. Yeah, and there's actually lots of, to mention Bach. Bach is very important to percussionists, because for every exam and every audition you take, you have to play a Bach. For every percussionist, yeah, you have to on the marimba. Yeah, okay. So back to the topic. So I thought of creating this group, and I found two other friends to form this quartet. And actually, we don't really call ourselves a quartet. We present ourselves as a collective. So we don't want to restrict ourselves to any size. So talking about the program for SIFA, Goals of Yesteryear. The first piece that I chose actually is titled Horn of Last Nightfall. This is written by this American composer called David Little. This piece is actually a really dark and tragic piece, and it's 30 minutes long. It's very long for percussionists, I guess, for just 4 percussionists banging for 30 minutes. But the cool thing and the thing that I really wanted to play this piece is because there's like electronics in it. So there's kind of like a backtrack with it, and I think it will be a little bit fresher for the audiences here. So, talking about the piece, this piece talks about the 1981 war. Not really war, like a little war massacre in El Salvador at El Mozete. So these U.S. trained soldiers just barged in and killed everyone, and yeah, they did all those ugly things to the females and the kids. It's really tragic. And so the composer was just reading a book one day, And then he read about the history of this war. So he said he realized as an American that he felt shameful, and he felt hurt that why the soldiers of his country went to do something like that. So he just created a piece of music out of this. Yeah. So there are many different movements in the work. There are 2 acts. Some movements try to mimic. We use instruments to mimic like gunshots, machine guns firing, like chan 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 chan. And then there are some parts that are really serene, which I think, in general, most people think we are just noisy and loud. But there are some movements, that are really quiet with like little glockenspiels, crotales, shimmering sounds, colors, which are really beautiful. And I'm not exaggerating, but when I first heard the whole piece of music with the theater, it was part of a theater act. I cried because it was pretty touching. It was like about at the end there was this movement about a little girl that was being killed, obviously, and it was just this little marimba solo at the end, fading away. It's pretty touching. Yeah, so for me, I felt like we all have ghosts, we all have like regrets in our heads regarding anything, But for the pandemic, it's just like a ghost that I don't think anyone in the world actually could get it out of their heads. And I felt like the pandemic was like a mini war. You can say a war for artists. We were restricted of all our performances, all our shows. Which is our bread and butter. So I guess all of us were in a state of confusion and disarray, right? And then talking about the second piece in my program, it's a masterpiece by Philip Glass. Philip Glass is, as everyone knows, an American legend. He actually wrote this piece for piano, for solo piano. The piece is titled 12 Pieces for Ballet. And then this really unorthodox and amazing Brazilian musical group. They are called a musical group because they play with instruments that are not normal. Like they create the instruments themselves from tree branches and stuff. It's super cool. They are called Uakti. So they took a couple of these movements from the ballet, and then they formed this whole, they rearranged this whole Philip Glass composition, and they call it Aguas de Amazonia. So they talk about the different rivers in the big Amazon River. And then Philip Glass and this percussion quartet in Chicago, Third Coast Percussion, they rearranged this whole thing into a percussion thing. So this piece is absolutely beautiful. It's very Philip Glass, constant harmony, constant themes, very meditative, very minimalistic. But what's interesting about this piece is we are using many unorthodox percussion instruments too, like the Armglocken, which is maybe not so familiar with audiences here. Armglocken is Swiss cowbells, by the way. We're using aluminum pipes, we're using Thai gongs, and for one movement, which is like the one that's giving us the most trouble right now, is we're using glass bowls, vases, like flower vase, glass and wine bottles. So we need like 24. We need 24 wine bottles, and
I can provide.
and we need like 8 glass bowls and a couple of vases because we need pitchers for them, and it's taking us a lot of time. It's a chore actually. Like you have to pour water, and then it's not in tune. Pour the water away. Ding ding ding. Yeah. So that's basically the gist of my program for SIFA this year.
I think it's kind of interesting you mentioned, because we often think of percussion instruments as being largely kind of textural or instruments in a larger sort of ensemble, but having the instruments sort of be at the forefront and be able to also kind of communicate sort of very powerful ideas. I think it's a really cool way of introducing people to the instruments, but also to the music of these composers. I mean, Glass is very well known, but someone like David Tittle is probably not known outside of people who know this music. So it's a great way to sort of introduce new music to audiences as well. So my next question actually is regarding sort of the pandemic. Most of us were forced to sort of turn a lot of our projects into things that were online and digital. I know that some, like for example, Radio Baroque, you guys had a whole bunch of videos that you put up online, and for John, I deeply enjoyed your home serenades, wine-induced home serenades. But do you? How did you feel that the need to move to a digital platform sort of transformed the way you make music sort of coming out of last year? Whoever wants to take the question first.
Well, I could go first. I mean, a lot of my approach in music making is very people-centric. People I want to work with, I just go straight to them, and we make something together. And obviously that wasn't possible, but thanks to the internet, myself and someone in, say, Nuremberg in Germany, for example, could just record a Donizetti aria together, But because it's all about connections, it's all about your friends that you really intensely want to make music with. And really, that's all you need, right? If you start from your community, then the rest, you would just do anything you can do to make that, engender that sort of occasion. And I did, going through that whole, wine, and it's kind of like, I don't know if this is the right place to talk about. It's like how Laurent Boy started, actually. It's because of wine, and then we all went on the trains, because, relaxed, and everything. But, I'm always looking at new ways of presenting, like crazy fun ways of presenting music. And I thought, if I put myself in a position of for every wrong note I play, sight reading this Haydn, I'm going to drink wine, and it gets progressively worse. Everyone will have a lark. It's fun. Because often we're like, oh, it's Haydn, or it's like, oh, because classical music is a ritual. You go and you dress nice, you shower, you put perfume, you wear the nicest shoes, like my jocks over here, and then you go to a concert, But what happens if you just sit at home and you're dressed in your shorts, and then you just play Mozart's second movement, and someone in Venezuela or in Alaska can just sit there and go oh, that's fun, I'm going to share it to my friend in Florida, and I think that's awesome. That's the way of creating your little community of friends. Everywhere. I mean, then there's the issue of time zones. So now I'm thinking if I post early in the day, my friends in Australia can, stuff like that. But for me, I think that's how I've maneuvered, from pre-COVID to COVID times, sort of making people still the center of my music making, making friends the center of my music making. And that hasn't changed. But everything else has, but that hasn't changed, yeah.
Gerald, for you, because you guys did straightforward concerts. You also did things that were more music video style. You did a whole newly composed piece of music. How did all of that how that help sort of you guys sort of find new ways of playing these instruments in that in sort of the period?
I think the first thing, I think our very first video was actually a parody, so. In some ways, isolation forces us to be more creative, like you and your wine soirees. For us, I think it gives us a platform to collaborate with people that we have collaborated before, and people that we want to collaborate in the future. So our very first parody video, "Strike the Virus," which is based on Purcell's "Strike the Viol." So you can see it's a little snippet of what Red Dot Baroque hopes to work towards in the future for these people, and it also gives us a different mental space also, I suppose, because we were forced to do so many of these live stream projects, because these are all very new to us. We are all so used to performing live to audiences, and it's quite, at first it's quite weird when you have to perform, and then when you get to your final cadence, and then you don't hear any applause. It's just silence. You're always every last note is met with silence. So this is a very new mental space for us also. I'm not too sure if you all had the same issue with that. So to be honest, I don't really know if we enjoy the live stream. That's the truth. Yeah, because we're all dying to go back to playing live. Yeah, because the mental space is it's just quite weird. Yeah, but I think it gave us lots of different it gives us different ways of opportunities to make music. Like even for myself, I just did Bach's 4 harpsichord concertos, just played by myself. Yeah, in a video. So I think it taught us a lot of new skills also. we can't, or rather it gives us, sorry, I need to think. I think it gives us lots of new dimensions and, things that we thought that we'd never be able to do. We did it. And yeah.
So Derek and Churen, maybe you can share how your performances that are upcoming at SIFA were very much influenced by sort of the experiences of the pandemic and moving online and sort of that transformation that has happened in the last year.
I think the move to digital and for all of us, the increased consumption of social media made me really reevaluate how I want to be presenting my art beyond the oral parameter. So the visuals or the marketing aspect of it, I think living in this TikTok age, for good or for worse, we're forced to think about condensing our stories into 15 or 60 seconds. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because if you can't tell your story in 15 seconds or 60 seconds, then maybe we should reevaluate whether our message is strong enough, right? And so, for example, for SIFA, I'm wearing a really gorgeous outfit by Lisa Von Tang. And she's a designer I admire tremendously because she melts Asian elements into, she's mixed heritage, and she just melts different cultural elements into her designs. And for me, her message through fashion was an identity that I also wanted to present for myself on stage. I think as an Asian woman playing Western classical music written by white men from hundreds of years past, this is a cultural, I wouldn't call it a problem, but this is something that needs to be explored, and it's something that I'm constantly exploring and trying to make sense of. So the visual presentation of it, the photos that I take of myself, what I wear on stage, I think this is all a very important part of my message. And it was because of the time during circuit breaker where it just, reset everything. That was just the most precious time for me to think through all of these issues.
Derek, what about yourself?
I think, playing music digitally or live streaming, it's not what most musicians truthfully want. But I think it's the way forward. We have to accept the fact that this is going to be the norm. Just like how working from home and Zoom meetings for you guys, this is the norm. We have to accept it. So as what Churen said, we are living in a TikTok age. And during the pandemic, during phase 1, I was just scrolling, social media every day, right? Because you have just nothing to do. And you're just seeing everyone posting videos of them playing music, right? Every group, wherever from which country you are. And then some of those videos are like ridiculously long. And to be honest, I don't think any one of you will be watching like the whole video, right? You know what I mean? So during the pandemic, my group, we created a series of 4 videos based on the pandemic. It's titled the Moss Project. It's titled Birdcage for the first movement, Birdcage, Adjustment, Struggle, and then New Normal. So the piece was written using Morse code, and the Morse code was from the name of the title. And to make it more applicable and more interesting, I would say, or attractive to the audience, we made the music only like 1 minute and 30 seconds, or 1 minute 40 seconds, I guess, with some intro at the back and at the end. Because I feel, visual aspect. So we incorporated dancers inside. So we hired 2 dancers to make it more inclusive and more multidisciplinary, I would say. And so people can see something nice and they can hear something nice. Because I think visual elements and audio elements are equally important in this age. Because everyone wants to see something cool, wants to see something flashy. Yeah.
Actually, Derek, I have a question on that. I've always thought that percussion is the most dance-like of all of these instruments that we play. Watching a percussionist play, for example, especially Chinese percussion for some reason, it's so beautiful in form. So when you said you wanted to incorporate more dancers, I was like, but isn't percussion playing a form of dance itself?
Yeah. I mean, I hope everyone thinks like you. I really hope so. I mean, thank you for that compliment. It is a dance-like element. That's why we incorporated dance. So like, it's kind of like, because we move so much with our bodies, and it's just like the piano actually. You guys, the way you move your hands and everything, the visual aspect is so important. For us, the only thing I was worried about actually of hiring the dancers is because why we hire the dancers is because we're afraid, people don't want to see us banging something. Because not all our pieces are melodic. We don't have melodies for every piece. So, some of them might be played on. We have a movement played on bodies, like you were talking on body, just body percussion. And there's one movement just played on snare drums and like a kick drum, so like doom doom ch doom. So this type of music, we might like it, but sometimes we are cautious and wary that people will think that it's it's too boring, it's too dull. Yeah, that's why we incorporate the dances in.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, everyone, and we hope that that this sort of coming out of this encourages everyone to be sort of less cautious about taking risk in making music and putting programs together, and then to sort of really, like you said, reevaluate sort of why we do what we do and how that can sort of drive the way we do things in the future. So thank you all for being part of this panel, and please catch them as part of the Compassion Chamber Music Series at the Singapore International Festival of Arts. You can find out more information at sifa.sg. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day ahead.